Hello everyone, and welcome to Month 1, a series of videos exploring the impact that Blood-like Rivers has had on the Revolution format during its first month in the format. Now, if none of those words made sense to you, Revolution is a custom card format for Magic the Gathering made up of 6 different custom sets. It's meant to emulate a standard-esque environment. You can find out more information about playing and brewing with the format in the description. Blood-like Rivers is the latest custom set to be added to the format. It joined a month ago, and since then has had a strong impact on the format, adding several new archetypes and changing up the meta in a huge way. However, those are things I'm going to be talking about in the other videos of this series. In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the stuff that has gone under the radar in the first month, / cards that I think that people should be brewing with more and exploring. Now, the criteria for this is generally cards that have not had a 4-1 or 5-0 league finishes or that have not showed up in a GP list. Also, going to acknowledge that basically no set in a rotating custom format is ever truly fully explored due to the size of our player bases and the nature of our players. It's just something that happens. However, that doesn't mean that we can't continue to explore sets while they're in the format, especially when it's only been a month that they're in. So let's get straight into it and talk about some of the cards that I think are underexplored and should be brewed with more. The first of these is going to be Legends Remembered. Legends Remembered is a pretty straightforward functional reprint of Regrowth. Regrowth is undeniably a powerful card. It is effectively a legacy staple, or not, maybe not a legacy staple. Let's roll that back. It's a cube staple, sorry, and it's seen lots of play in Eternal formats. However, it's usually only as strong as what you're recurring, and that's kind of the balancing point for it in a standard-esque format. However, we do have powerful tools to abuse it with loops with things like In Search of Peace. We're also in a format that has been, and I think will continue to be, with the inclusion of BLR, very graveyard focused. We have lots of ways to mill over important threats and interaction. So the ability to just pick out and recur important threats or interaction when needed, I think is a strong reason to run Legends Remembered, especially if you're doing toolboxy stuff with Essence Remade or other like tutory cards that would otherwise leave your pieces stranded in the graveyard. Overall, Legends Remembered is the kind of tool that I think is obviously strong, but not obvious where it wants to go, / it's been overshadowed by some of the more straightforwardly powerful build-arounds. I think that the places where I'd expect to see it are some of the over-the-top control decks that we've been seeing in Sultai or Bant colors, and also some of the more toolboxy mid-range decks. Maybe itself as a toolbox search piece or a way to recur toolbox search pieces, but either way, I think it provides inevitability / utility in a way that was not present in the format before and should be explored. Next up, it's going to be something that honestly is a little surprising that hasn't been explored yet. It's going to be Soldiers. So people in this format love Tribal. However, now that we have a 2-mana Lord for Soldiers plus some other very powerful soldier support cards like Lich, Bane, Forerunner, we haven't really seen people playing Soldiers to a successful extent. And I think this is because the mono-red quote-unquote scrap aggro decks have been on people's minds. But Soldiers is very powerful right now, especially with the amount of token support that it has. It can really just run over people in a traditional tribal aggro way. There's also a bunch of Soldiers from Karslav and Viridian's Last Mission, so it is not solely a BLR deck, and there's lots of interesting cross-set synergies / cross-set card opportunities for the deck. So overall, I cheated a little on this one, calling out 2 cards, but I think in general, people should be exploring the Soldiers archetype a lot more. And I think that, especially with how aggressively oriented the format is right now, Soldiers being able to potentially go wide and just outboard other aggro decks seems like a real reason to try and run it. Next up, let's look at Reaper's Call to Harvest. So I think Reaper's Call to Harvest is one of those cards where it has kind of gone under the radar because black has an intensely powerful suite of 2-drops right now. However, Reaper's Call to Harvest has some interesting and powerful niches. First of all, being only 1 black pip means that it's eminently splashable. This is important for 3-color decks, such as Jund. Speaking of Jund, this card spikes heavily with Ancient, and also against Ancient. Like I mentioned earlier with Legends Remembered, this is a heavy graveyard meta, and has been for a while. The ability to just consistently, I'm going to exile a card, make a body, is like good and fine. And if you're in any way built to reach Ancient, this card is insane, because obviously a 5/5 for 2 is just crazy value. And I think that there are lots of like Jund and black green and like just like decks in the Jund color combinations that are aiming to turbo Ancient, that I think that this card should be seeing more play, at the very least in sideboards, and honestly maybe even in main boards, as a meta call. Next up, we're going to have Arcane Cauldron. So I think that this is a format where value engines or build-arounds are super important, and that's kind of, and not just important, but also I think the sort of thing that people latch onto. So I'm surprised that people haven't been brewing with Arcane Cauldron. Arcane Cauldron is incredibly straightforward. Just you put in 2 mana and you get a fork. And it being in colorless means that there are a lot of places to put it. I think that the main reason this probably isn't seeing play is because the main spells-based deck right now is Blue-Red Prowess, which is an explosive aggro deck that really doesn't want value engines like this. But I think even in the set this is from, there's cards like Ella, who support a more like mid-rangey or controlling Spellslinger style deck that can just aim to value opponents out of the game by like copying cantrips or whatever, and then just copying burn and then just killing them, and then or just copying burn to like turn stuff into board wipes, etc., and just like outvalue your opponent. I think Arcane Cauldron works on such a powerful axis for that. So I think that in a format where there's already lots of respectable build-arounds, I think Arcane Cauldron is like in a perfect position to make its stamp there, right there. Next up, we're going to have Safe and Sound. So Safe and Sound is, I think it's one of the cards in this list that, rather than making its own deck, I think slots very easily into an existing deck, and that is the Sultai control decks we're seeing with Vibrant Vengeance. Now, I think that they could also potentially jockey for slots, Vibrant Vengeance being another big mana type card, but the niche that Safe and Sound provides is it gets you mana, but also gets you overwhelming card advantage. I think that Vibrant Vengeance gives you a stronger mana advantage, but in matchups where you really want to retain that card advantage, I think Safe and Sound is obviously powerful as a Fact or Fiction variant despite the sorcery speed rider. And the ability to net you mana so that you can instantly cast something that you grab off of it means that it's often not as much of a tempo hit as it would look. So I think that Safe and Sound should be played or at least tested in more of these Sultai Vibrant Vengeance style control decks as a way to both out-resource your opponent in every way, from mana to cards, and probably at that point you're going to draw into cards that help you take over the board as well. Next up is Immaculate Mandate. So this is a card, honestly, that I was quite scared of before BLR rotated into the format. And I think that it's a card that is just generally really powerful, and I was expecting other people to brew with it, which is why I didn't in the first month, but then it didn't happen. I think that one thing that makes it a little worse compared to other Reanimator style decks, obviously, is the triple white, which is a hard mana requirement, and also the fact that there isn't really redundancy for it, so you really need to hit an Immaculate Mandate. However, we also have like a bevy of powerful artifacts and enchantments. I think particularly enchantments, we just got a bunch of them that mill or otherwise have powerful ETBs. So I think, or that sacrifice themselves, etc. So I think that a sort of Abzan or Bant Immaculate Mandate deck, which just aims to turbo mill themselves and then play an Immaculate Mandate on turn 4 or 5 to just blow up the game, should be a deck that at least sees like testing and brewing. And I think of the cards on this list, this is the one that I am most likely to try and make a mark with myself. Next up, we have Poet of Glory. I think speaking of enchantment values slash getting enchantments into the graveyard, Poet of Glory is in a niche that I think is really important in this format right now, which is it's a 2-mana scaling threat. So much of the format is dominated by powerful scaling threats. There's Sprite Dragon, Reinstated Reaper, Partners in Crime, you name it. It's got it. Poet of Glory, I think, has potential to find a niche there. While it does have weaker starting stats than some of those and no keywords, its ability to get you incremental card advantage is really, really powerful, especially when you're looping stuff like Dark Covenant. You're drawing 2 cards a turn plus growing Poet of Glory. I also think that this is pretty interestingly positioned with Rifts from Karsus, because those naturally sacrifice themselves, and then you can traverse them with Poet of Glory. Or if you have another creature, you just traverse them with that creature, attack with Poet of Glory, recur it. Overall, I think that this Poet of Glory is in a powerful niche of being a scaling threat that demands an answer, while also generating overwhelming card advantage slash being an engine in its own right. I think there should probably be a deck with like 4 of this, 4 of Dawnglade Wildbear, a bunch of value enchantments, and then just go to town. And this is another deck which I think is incredibly powerful, but also completely untested. Next up is Wildcourt Seeker. Like I mentioned, scaling threats are the name of the game, and Wildcourt Seeker is, I think, honestly, like very similar to Poet of Glory, except it can come. The main thing that makes Wildcourt Seeker, I think, much more interesting than Poet of Glory is that the things that you need to get into the graveyard to make it good are actually free in this format, in the sense of we have New Divide and we have lands that can get themselves into the graveyard, and then those lands naturally then find land types to make Wildcourt Seeker grow. Its downside is that it doesn't grow bigger than a 5/5. Or well, it can if you have non-basic land types. I believe that there's a layer in the format from VRD, so you can maybe make this a 6/6 if you're going a full 5-color deck. But honestly, like, do you need your 2-mana play to be bigger than a 5/5 or a 6/6? Probably not. And also probably not when it's cycling you through your entire deck. There's also powerful value lands that sacrifice themselves. I believe, I forget the name of it, but there's one which is a colorless land which you pay 4 and a tap, regrowth from your graveyard. So being able to recur some of these powerful lands which sacrifice themselves for value is another angle that I think a Wildcourt Seeker could be particularly powerful on. But on its own, it's just a scaling threat that gets you free card advantage and also potentially gets you fixing. Of course, all of this requires you to have a New Divide or an Evolving Wilds, but those are not entirely difficult asks with how the format is right now. At number 2, we have one that might be slightly controversial, but I think is really unexplored, and it's Glimpse of Something Great. At the start of the format, one of the most interesting decks was Rapture Rejects. And for those of you who remember, it was essentially a black-white disruptive aggro deck built around cards like Runic Sealer, which essentially locked down your opponent's ability to play cards and then just beat them down while they were scrambling to find an answer. A Glimpse of Something Great, I think, has potential to find a very similar niche. It's very similar to Runic Sealer. It's 3 mana, 3/3, and the vigilance is pretty powerful here, and the fact that it has multitude means that it scales really well into the late game. And with black existing and having such a bevy of powerful 2-drops or 4-drops, I think that you can honestly, on first cast, pretty easily just name either 2 or 4 and then be very safe with this, unless you're facing off against something like, if you're looking at like a Partners in Crime on the other side of the deck, other side of the board, then sure, you name 3. But I think that Glimpse of Something Great should be explored with other hate bears, such as Cyber's Clan Arbiter, and potentially bring back the sort of disruptive mid-range aggro decks that haven't seemed to find a foothold since we found other mid-range options. Finally, at number 1, we have Lich Bane Ward Wielder. Now, might be cheating a little bit with this. This card has definitely seen play, but its play has fallen off dramatically since the start of the format. People were playing this in leagues, but I think that it was dropped far too quickly, and people should be exploring this card more. It being a 2/2 for 2 is very notable in that it is missed by Fatal Flaw. This is also actually notable for Glimpse of Something Great being a 3/3 for 3. Fatal Flaw being the most played removal spell in the format means that threats that dodge it, I think, should be prioritized / are currently underexplored, especially when people are playing scaling threats which just die to it. You can blank your opponent's removal while having your own online is a really strong place to be. Speaking of blanking removal, Lich Bane Ward Wielder can just redirect that with its second mode. And also, its first mode is insanely powerful in a format which is dominated, again, by cards like New Divide, and can also just get powerful incidental value. There's basically no matchup in which Ward Wielder isn't live, and it's not really a card your opponents can play around, per se, because either you have it or you don't, and they just kind of have to keep playing the game, especially lots of times when there are triggered abilities which you have no control over once they're on the board. You just kind of have to be like, okay, I just hope they don't have it, but I can't control this going off. Overall, I think that Lich, honestly, if this was a soldier, I think this would single-handedly make red-white soldiers into a very powerful competitive deck. As is, I think that people should be exploring red-white X lists that like either like disruptive aggro / tempo, mid-range, just like this goes really well in decks that aim to copy ETBs. I also, if I remember right, there is a convoluted infinite combo with this and untapper in. There's a card which in Karsus, which whenever it becomes untapped, you get to create a token that's a copy of a creature you control. So I believe you have like 2 Lichbane Ward Wielders and that, you can go infinite, and do like a Kiki style combo, which requires a lot of setup, but I think it's also something that is underexplored, especially in a format where we're losing 2 of our primary combo / lock decks. So getting something that can slot well into a normal mid-range deck and just have an instant go over the top plan seems pretty spicy. But yeah, overall, those are the top 10 cards that I think are unexplored in Blood-like Rivers right now, and that I think people should be trying to brew with going into the next month. Are there any cards I missed? If so, let me know in the comments. And if you do end up brewing your list around these / placing well with them, feel free to @ me in the Custom Magic Discord in the Revolution channels to let me know how it goes. But yeah, until next time, this is Caillou. Oh, but before I forget, don't forget to check out the other 2 videos in this series, which will be on the top 10 most impactful cards so far from Blood-like Rivers, and a general meta review of month 1 of Blood-like Rivers. But yeah, until next time, this is going to be Caillou, signing off.